Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Journey to the Overland Game Designer series. So in this episode I want to follow up on a topic that we started last week where we discussed money in Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games. And one of the things I thought about when I kind of looked at a lot of the comments I was getting, and I also kind of thought about DM Scotty's point that he was trying to make, is I think a lot of people confuse a role-playing game session with a role-playing game. And for most people, when they think of role-playing games, the role-playing game is actually the role-playing game session. So they have no context outside of their game session of the role-playing game itself. And that's the reason I decided to do this video, is because I want to kind of discuss the difference between the role-playing game and a role-playing game session. Now, I think everybody understands what I mean by a role-playing game session, but if you don't, briefly, it's basically where you get together with other role players, you get together with a GM, you get together normally with a game module, right? Or else a GM has designed his own campaign. And you play that module, you play that campaign. And that's a role-playing game session, right? But when most people talk about role-playing games, they're actually referring to that, right? How to do this in your role-playing game. How to get your characters to do that in your role-playing game. How to use this in your role-playing game. Well, actually what they mean is how to do all that in a role-playing game session. Now, you may be saying, well, it's a distinction without a difference, right? You're splitting hairs. But that's actually not correct, and let me explain why. The role-playing game itself is actually the whole complete game that you purchase, and the game consists of a game master's module mostly. It consists of a player's handbook. It consists of a bestiary. It usually consists of a map. And in reality, most people who role play for very long times will take part in many sessions with many different dungeon masters or game masters. They will go through prepared modules. They will go through homebrew campaigns. And they will buy other supplements and items for the role-playing game. And I think this is important because when we look at concepts like money, right, and you have a dungeon master like DM Scotty who says, oh, I don't think we should use money in role-playing games no more because it's obsolete. It's a throwback to an old D&D. Well, DM Scotty is talking about in his game sessions. Right, in DM Scotty's game sessions, it may be obsolete. It may be a throwback to D&D. The same thing if somebody says, well, the problem I have with money is after a while, you get so much of it and everything is so cheap that it's ridiculous to keep track of buying new boots, new shoes, new swords, and new armors. Well, that's in the confines of the sessions that you have been playing. And to give you another example, let's just say you've been playing normal role-playing game sessions in a small town and you are involved in the day-to-day little things that's going to happen in the town. There's bandits, there's orcs, there's wolves, there's attacks, there's fights. If you have had a character that has probably went and killed a dragon or found some pirate's trove, right, all of that stuff is going to be insignificant to your wealth. But if you were to move your game, remember the game versus the session, if you were to move your game to another environment, like I think there used to be a campaign called Birthright, right, by TSR. And Birthright kind of dealt with nobles and kings and blooded characters in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you basically with that little hoard, let's say you have 50,000 gold pieces. If you were to bring that into the setting for Birthright, you would not even qualify as a noble or a lord, right? You might at best have enough to be a governor or a little sheriff of a province. And be honest with you, you would not be able to manage or pay for the affairs of your province for very long with a paltry sum of gold. And that is a distinction which kind of, I think, highlights best the difference between your role-playing game and your role-playing game session. And in a game like Birthright, money and expenditures was very important. I mean, there was tables and charts for how much it costs to upkeep your kingdom, how much it costs to upkeep your castle and your troops, your land. And you dealt with politics on a very large scale, from kingdom to kingdom and government to government, not just what was going on in a particular town. And so the whole reason for this post today, or for this video, is to kind of get you to start thinking, if you're doing something in a game session and you're starting to feel like it's obsolete or it's become a trope, then maybe you need to start looking at different settings and environments for your game, right? As opposed to complaining about the game and saying, I'm going to take this out of the game and I'm going to change this about the game because we don't use it, it doesn't work right. Well, what you really mean to say is we don't use it in our game sessions and it doesn't work right in our game sessions. Doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't belong in the game, right? And I already did the video on why you could never remove money out of Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy role-playing games, and you can listen to that or click on that in the playlist to kind of get that argument, which I'm not going to repeat here. But I think, hopefully what I've been able to highlight in this discussion is simply, you have Dungeons and Dragons or whatever fantasy role-playing game you play as the game, and then you also have Dungeons and Dragons or whatever fantasy role-playing system you use and your game sessions, right? And though it's very confusing, and understandably that most people would think that they are one and the same, in actuality, they are not.